I am planning to build a stealth shelter here. One that isn't afraid of moving a few things. You've got to rearrange the furniture a little bit to make it comfortable. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 10 holes. Let's start here, a hole like that. And then I'm going to put a tree into that hole. So we want the lower part cleared of branches, the lower part of this tree, sapling. And then we're going to push it in to the hole that my machete finger has made. So there's one. We're going to do that all the way around here. There's number 2. And then what we're planning to do is to bend this one over like this one over like this. We're going to wrap them around each other. This branch here held nicely, but on the far side it didn't. So we just need to get some bark to use as string. We want some string. So most of these trees are blue gum. They are not going to give you good string at all. But this is a Port Jackson. I've checked, it's kind of alive. So we just need to try get the bark stripped. So there's a piece of string. So here are all our pieces of string. Let's go back and tie that. So let's get a suitable, nice piece of string. Wrap this around. And then let's tie this. So that's now nice, tied down, and we have to now repeat the process. Now that I have all the arches, I'm going to put one branch as the ridgepole along the top. And seeing as I have got my string, I'm going to tie this. It already feels a bit stronger. So, looking from a bit of a distance, look how nice that is. Looks like a bit of a work of art. Well, here we are in our shelter. Autumn, absolutely beautiful day. And we're going to have a jaffle sandwich or two. As you can see, it doesn't take much to set up. We'll just oil our jaffle machine. We're going to have chicken and mayo sandwiches. So there's the bread. Here's the chicken, already cooked. And the mayo. I just love plastic. I'm surrounded by plastic, and I love and adore plastic. Guess that's not very environmentally friendly. I mean, that's mayo and onion. But if you love it, you can't help it. The heart wants what the heart wants. So, let's stoke her up. Looks like it's been a bit of a while since we used this. Still, I'm sure it's going to be great. I absolutely love this shelter, this archway with the branches and how protected it is on both sides. I think, you know, I love every shelter that I make, but this one in particular I really do like. I think it's wonderful, and I think I'm going to be making shelters like this a lot in the future. So I'm not expert on jaffles, but I've done it before. We'll just keep turning it so that it doesn't burn. And I also like this shelter from the point of view, because it's a dome or an arch, it'll be very easy to drag a tarpaulin over the top of it and make it waterproof. I hope to maybe show that later on. Although it's a beautiful sunny day, and I'll show you how beautiful it is. Just let me show you how nice my view is all the way around. That's more or less how beautiful the view is from here. We have a forest on our back. So that's the best I can do to show it. I'm not sure how, as I say, I'm not an expert. I'm an expert on a snack which maker. I'm not that expert on cooking jaffles on gas, but I presume whatever happens, it's going to be fairly edible. So I guess the hard part is just keeping everything organized. I think while I'm here, I might as well make the second one so that when we take the first one out, we're ready to put the second one in. And I'm sure if we keep turning it, it's got less chance that it's going to burn. So every shelter gets inspired by something. This was inspired by the last shelter I built, where I started sticking poles in the ground, because up to now my shelters have been built around the trees that are there. I try to use trees that are currently growing in their actual situation, and that makes it easier to prop them up because they're already growing. But when I found out how easy it was, to stick poles in the ground, I got inspired to make a shelter of sticking poles in the ground, and that's got the advantages. You can do it almost anywhere where the ground is not too hard. So that this sort of shelter evolved from my last shelter, and I think it's pretty nice. So we've got our second sandwich waiting. After our first gets done. And like I say, it's just a matter of trying to keep everything. Okay, that's beginning to smoke a bit, so I would imagine that I've probably either burnt or got the toast pretty toastily done. Sizzling, so yeah, I'm sure it's all going to be good. Right, let's sneak a peek. Doesn't that look fantastic? I think that looks perfectly done. Look at that. We'll just oil the jaffle iron again. And put in the second sandwich. So, one down. Yeah, I would say that if there was any food group that I would live on, or food type, it would be jaffle iron sandwiches. If I was forced to choose, like for the rest of your life, you've got to live on one food group, and it'd be something like this, just different fillings. But the basic concept of a jaffle sandwich, I just love it. And this is absolutely delicious. Totally living up to my expectations. Now, in my last video, I talked about how I was using Perplexity.ai to answer my questions. It's like chat GPT. And I said from experimenting with Perplexity.ai, I began to feel I understand more how God operates. You just write something and it gives you the answer. Well, in God's case, he just says something and it gets done. And then in the last video, talked about how in Genesis 1, we see an example of how God says, let there be light, and there is light. Let the earth bring forth creeping things and fowl of the air and after their kind and so on, and it's done. So God has got this whole system so set up that he just has to say something and it gets done. And I mentioned that I felt that Genesis 1 was a type of what happens after each mass extinction. Now, there's one subject that Christians tend to stay away from. I think they're scared of the subject, and that's paleontology. Frankly, Christians, if you knew the truth about what the fossil record says, you would want to study it, because the fossil record shows that God creates things. And I actually mean to prove it and say why that is true. As I say, just experimenting with Perplexity.ai, where you just ask for something and it just spews out whatever you ask for. You want a computer program, it'll do it. I asked Perplexity.ai, I gave it my diet, 4 slices of bread, like now, a little bit of chicken, mayonnaise, etc. How much of my recommended daily allowance of food does that provide? So I gave it my whole diet and it just spat it out. I said, what percentage? It said 2 eggs, so much protein, so much fat, so much carbohydrate, etc. 4 slices of bread. Then it's just marvelous. And God has the same thing set up whereby he just says something. Let there be this, and it pops into existence. Now, just that inspired me to feel how after the 5 major mass extinctions, and then there was another one just before Genesis 1, I think it was called the, what's it called? The Greater Dryas. Anyway, Dryas is involved, extinction about 12,000 years ago, wiped out the Clovis culture in America, etc., and wiped out many of the megafauna. There have been many mass extinctions, and after each mass extinction, this is the interesting part. You suddenly see a whole lot of new animals just whoops suddenly appear on the scene. And this occurred at the very beginning of life as well. You get the pre-Cambrian Cambrian period where there's almost no life in the fossil record. And unfortunately, where I live, it's that era of the geological column. There's no life in the rocks. We have a Table Mountain sandstone here. Well, I think our next one's done. And so our rocks have got no life. They're pre-Cambrian rocks. And have a look at that. And then suddenly in the Cambrian period, you get the sudden appearance of life in all its wonderful, amazing complexity and glory. You get virtually all the modern phyla of plants and animals appear in what is called the Cambrian explosion. They call it an explosion because there's a sudden explosion of life. So God just said, let there be, and he just spoke, and all the different phyla, virtually all the phyla that you see today were there from the very beginning, from the Cambrian, which is the first of the paleological epochs with animals, or complex animals. So, and this is the thing where creationists should get on the bandwagon. They should study this. They should be excited as I am about it. That where you get a sudden explosion of life, and all the phyla pop into existence in the Cambrian explosion. Virtually all of them that we see around today as well, but they all look very different back then. There were even arthropods and things with backbones. Or vertebrate, the vertebrata, like small prototype fish with backbones. That is always very exciting because that shows creation. So you look at the rocks, millennia, millions and millions of years, nothing. Suddenly at the Cambrian explosion, everything. All the phyla of plants and animals virtually suddenly pop into existence. That's a creation event. God spoke them into existence like he did in Genesis 1. But this was long before Genesis 1. Then you get the Precambrian where there's no life. Then you get the Cambrian. Then you get the Ordovician, where you start to get, like, mostly the seas are filled with these fish with they got skeletons. They protect the bony plates over them. Then you get the Silurian, where you start to get animal and plants on land. Then the Devonian. Now there's a mass extinction in the Devonian. And after that, God speaks again, and completely new animals come up. Then you get the Carboniferous, where there's an abundance of trees on land which get turned into coal and our current petrol products. So God was thinking ahead when mankind would have motor cars and need coal and fossil fuels. Then you get the Permian period, where you're getting animals that look a bit like our mammals, big. They look like almost like our mammals, but slightly different. I think they call them therapsids. And then you get what is called a whole era called the Mesozoic, which is where you get the age of the reptiles and gymnosperms or pine trees type family. And then you get so after the Permian comes, God seems to go, let's just put mammals on hold. Then there's 3 eras of the dinosaurs, and then that ends with another mass extinction. They call that the CT boundary, the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary. So after each of these mass extinctions, like after the dinosaurs disappear, suddenly you get the age of the mammals. So God is now speaking mammals into existence. And at first, he just makes small little mammals after the dinosaurs are wiped out 65 million years ago. And then God makes the bigger mammals, the woolly mammoths, the saber-toothed tigers, the sloths, giant sloths, etc. And there's a whole world of mammals completely different to the ones that are around today. And then about 12,000 years ago, as I say, there's I think it's called the Greater Dryas. I know the word Drys comes into it. There's like a huge cooling of the earth, and there's a mass extinction. You find that there's Clovis culture in America. You get the saber-toothed tigers and the woolly mammoths, etc., get wiped out. And then 6,000 years ago, we come to Genesis 1, where God speaks all the modern animals, all the domesticated plants and animals, the sheep, the goats, the cattle, the dogs, the cats, the pigeons, the cereal plants like maize, etc., all get spoken into existence with all the modern plants and animals that we see around us today. And yeah, that's the modern era. We call that the Holocene, or the Age of Man is the latest little subsection of it. We living what is called the Quaternary, and the last era of the Quaternary is the Holocene, which is the Age of Man, which is the animals that we see around today. Got a lovely fruit salad of peaches and grapes. But even the modern domestic animals just pop on the scene, seemingly out of nowhere. So if you go through all the epochs, the geological column, at each boundary, at each new period, there's a kind of a extinction, and then there's new organisms that come into being, because if there weren't, there wouldn't be any reason to call it a new epoch or period. So I see totally ongoing extinction, creation, extinction, creation. Now evolutionists try to explain it this way. Take 65 million years ago, when the dinosaurs were wiped out by this meteorite that crashed into somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, caused a nuclear winter, left a layer of iridium on the Earth's surface to prove that it was a meteorite that wiped it out. Then you find completely new species of mammals, for example, that weren't around, suddenly kind of dominate and are there in abundance. So God has spoken them into existence. He's done with the past animals and plants. And now we're back to the age of the mammals. There are giant mammals, but now when he's going to make man on the earth, it's no good having woolly mammoths, and obviously dinosaurs have died out long ago. So he wipes out all the saber-toothed tigers, the really big, fairly nasty animals that could eat man, and he gives them a whole lot of domestic animals in the last 6,000 years, where all the animals you see around us are basically within our ability to tame and cope with. So Genesis chapter 1 is just God creating animals after a fairly minor mass extinction due to I think a freezing of the earth 12,000 years ago. I think it's called the Younger Dryas. That's right, the Younger Dryas mass extinction. And I think during that extinction too, the Neanderthals got wiped out. And the Denisovians and all the other human-like or species that were like human, like Homo sapiens, but not Homo sapiens. So now God created Adam and Eve 6,000 years ago, the representatives of Homo sapiens, and they're the only group that still remain, because the mass extinction wiped out the Denisovians and the Homo naledi and the Homo floresiensis and the Homo this and the Homo that, Homo neanderthalensis, and all the other creatures that looked like man were wiped out, and God started with Adam and Eve and 6,000 years ago. So, and then there was a flood after that, 1,600 years after the creation of Adam. And then in the last 4,400 years since the flood, those species that made it through the flood have been around today, and they constitute modern history. And modern history really revolves around that time. From Babylon on, we have the Fertile Crescent, and we have Egypt and Babylon, and all the people of the modern races start building civilizations. And isn't it interesting that civilization only goes back just over 4,000 years? Before that, the only record you have of mankind is basically a few cave paintings and a few stone tools that you can't date. There's very little in the way of buildings. So how illogical is it that in all human history, there's nothing until 4,000 years ago, when God creates Adam and Eve, wipes out all the other Homo, this and that weren't making great civilizations, creates modern domestic animals. And now mankind starts to build cities and civilizations, and to leave a record, and to leave buildings and pyramids and temples and all kinds of things as proof of his existence and, well, part of his culture. But before that, imagine that all up to 6,000 years ago, there were nothing but a few paintings on the wall, a few burial sites, a few stone tools, a few, flints and so on. Obviously, something very radical happened 6,000 years ago, that mankind started building civilizations. And it's because God created mankind a new species, Homo sapiens, a new species of mankind, incorporating a few Neanderthal genes. 1 or 2% of our genes are Neanderthal. And giving us domesticated animals and plants so that we could live in societies and civilizations. I find it all ties up perfectly with the Bible. And after each of the mass extinctions, God just speaks new animals. They just appear in the fossil record as if suddenly just appearing on the scene. It's like the curtain closes on one group of plants and animals and opens on a completely new group with nothing, no transition species, nothing. It's just a completely new cast of animals and plants. And that shows creation. That is why I think Christians should study paleontology. Yes, they're going to be fed a whole lot of BS about evolution. But if they know that at each change, after each mass extinction, you get things like the Cambrian explosion, you get explosions of new fauna and flora after each mass extinction. And that is a creation event that you see in the rocks. So all these animals are the same, then boom, there's a layer, and then suddenly from that layer on, the animals are all completely different in the fossil record. That's a creation event shown in stone. Just look how incredibly easy it was to throw a top over this structure and make it basically waterproof. I haven't finished the job, but I mean, that's a work of art. That's a thing of beauty. Ignore the ugliness of the top that's been standing in the rain, but that's going to be a basically a waterproof shelter. It took me literally minutes to pull this over this stealth shelter. So just for that reason alone, I think this shelter is going to be absolutely gorgeous in the rain. I love everything about this shelter. Obviously that's not as stealthy, and what I would do is tie branches together and then drape them over. So tie branches in pairs, as I showed, using my bark for string, and then just drape them over here and hide this top. But if it was at night, it might not even be necessary. And then on this side, the same thing. You see, it's beautiful and waterproof, and the most important part, which is the top, has been covered, so it's going to keep the rain out. So another reason why I think this shelter is absolutely wonderful. Look at that, look at that sweeping area. So here is our bag. We've got virtually 2 body lengths of space, and look at, we can see through here that wonderful archway. I love this stealth shelter. I love it.